everybody, I'm Lon Stroschein, former public company executive turned lifestyle engineer. In 2022, I walked away from my job as a public company executive. I left without a safety net, without another job, without a backlog of clients, or without a resume. But I left anyway. I left because I knew the best days of my life were right in front of me, and they weren't going to be lived where I was standing. Since then, I've launched a best-selling book, coached thousands of elite performers around the world, hosted a top-rated podcast, moved my family across the country, and created a movement that has inspired the change in 1,000 lives. Look, if you're here, it's not an accident or an algorithm. It's you. If you've reached the top of your game and you feel stuck, if you'd trade what you have but don't know what you'd trade it for, then buckle up. This podcast is for you. I'm glad you're here. Let's get started. I'm going to see all of you along the Normal 40 Highway. Hey everybody, welcome to the Normal 40 podcast. My name is Lon Stroschein. I am the founder of the Normal 40, and boy, do I have a show for you today. You know, look, you guys know that my whole premise around the Normal 40 podcast is just to show up curious, and that I get to meet guests right along with you. Right along with you, we're pulling apart, we're pulling at the very fabric of what brings them to where they are today. And I'm here to tell you, I was not fully prepared for what I went through, the journey I went on with Kevin Hoover, my guest today. Kevin's incredible. We're about the same age. He's done amazing things. He's worked for amazing people, and he's had amazing hardship in his life, and we talk all about it. It's going to be one of the rare podcasts that we get into faith, but he dropped something on the table that I just couldn't help but go back at. And it has everything to do with faith. And in whatever that means for you, that's exactly what we ramble on here. So look, everybody, thanks for being here. Thanks for being part of my journey. Thanks for being on the Normal 40 Highway. And I'm going to see all of you on the podcast. Kevin.
How are you?
Dude, you combed your hair and everything for the call today.
I couldn't remember if I had long hair last time we talked or if I had it cut, but yeah, I did comb my hair today.
I love it, dude. How are you?
I'm doing good. Hope your new year was good. Holidays, all that jazz.
It's been fantastic. It's been my first Christmas, I think, ever, where I got to spend Christmas Eve and Christmas Day by a pool that I own. Well, I know it's the only one that I own, but I think it's the first Christmas where I've been by a pool.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
That was always a weird part for me when I lived in Los Angeles, because it's always just, well, not now, but it was 70 and sunny every day. So living in Southern California and just going through Christmas where it's like, oh, there's a palm tree with lights on it, and Santa Claus in shorts.
Yeah.
It's a little foreign.
Yeah, I didn't know what to expect. You know, in South Dakota, lights on houses and snow and snowmen and sleds and all the things. Well, down here, I'm like, well, do people put up Christmas lights? I don't know. Well, I'm here to tell you, they do. They do. It's a thing. There's no snow that glistens off of it, but there are Christmas lights, I will assure you.
That's fun. That's so fun. So fun.
Well, dude, thanks so much for doing this. I'll just warn you that every word that's been said so far, there's a 90% chance are already going to be part of the podcast. So don't say anything that you want redacted, because I'm not good at that. I don't have enough technical savvy to cut something out of this.
Good. And I'm old enough where I generally try not to say things I would regret anyway.
Yeah, but see, you know, it's my job to make you say those things that you might regret. But we'll see how this works.
I love it. I love it.
Well, just for a little bit of background for anybody who might be listening now, Kevin and I were connected not all that long ago. In fact, it was about a month ago by our friend, Dr. Patrick O'Malley. And you and Patrick grew up together. I've only got to know Patrick within the last year. And I know he's had a big influence on your life, and he's quickly having an influence on mine too. And what happened was Patrick said, hey, you two need to meet. We said, okay, well, not meet, just connect. We do what we set up a Zoom call. You and I connected for about 40 minutes. We had a fantastic ramble. At the end of that, I said, well, do you want to do a podcast? And you said, yeah, let's do a podcast. And that's it. That's as much pre-work. That's as much prep. That's what brings us to this exact moment. I know 40 minutes of conversation. Through 40 minutes of conversation, I know you're what we talked about. But beyond that, the point that I like to make with my listener is I'm learning right along with everyone. What your story is, what you where you are, where you're going, but where you've been and what got you here. And it's just a fascinating way to bring a guest on and go on a journey together, man.
I love it. Thanks for having me. This is going to be so much fun.
Yeah, dude. So look, this is what I want to know. I want you to hearken back and tell me what you were doing in third grade.
Oddly enough, I think about this a lot. I have a 9-year-old son who's in fourth grade, so I often go back and say, what was I doing when I was his age? And so when I was in third grade, my fondest memory was learning the multiplication tables. And it was the first time that I remember actively learning, even though I had, I remember like writing and things like that. But my teacher had taken these cardboard or these sort of construction paper cutouts and had everyone make a rocket ship. And she put on the wall. And as you passed your multiplication tables at 1, 2, 3, all the way up to 12, your rocket ship moved up. And my only concern was I wanted to be the first one to reach 12 because we went from 1 to 12. And you had to memorize your multiplication tables. And you would go back to her table and she would ask you, what's 3 times 3? And you would recite them. And so in third grade, my memory was that was my first experience with competitive learning, I'll call it now. And so I just really remember being concerned with like being the first rocket ship to 12. And then I also remember when I got to 12, I don't know what I was expecting to happen, but nothing happened. There was no parade, no dancing, there was no band. It was just congratulations. You now know your multiplication tables through 12. And then we moved on to the next topic. And I was like, well, that's kind of a bummer. Like what is that how life is? So that's what I was
doing. No real rocket ship? What the heck's going on here?
Yeah, I was like, but I think that's a very interesting question because, as I do think about things like that quite often, I think about them in the context of how they now construct my life as, a 50-year-old father. And how what did that mean at the time? At the time, it just meant I was finishing first, getting my multiplication tables, and now it has a little deeper significance, I think.
And that's the entire premise of this podcast is to go all the way from third grade to a 50-year-old dad of a fourth grader. And so let's go back though. Let's go back to tell me where you grew up. Just a little bit about where you grew up and about what your parents did and what your childhood was like.
I grew up in a small town in North Carolina, right outside of Charlotte. It's now a much larger town. It's called Mooresville. A lot of the NASCAR racers come from Mooresville. In fact, I went to school with Dale Earnhardt Jr. when I was in high school, and so it's that area where that was the main thing that people did. And my dad owned an insurance company. He was in insurance for 50 years. He retired about 7 years ago. And my mom worked her life as an admin assistant secretary. She was in marketing for a while for Planet Hollywood, and she did things like that. My father went to college. My mom did not go to college. So that was the conversation my mom and I used to have were, make sure you get educated because you want to have a job like your father, not like me. That was what she used to tell me. And it was a very, very happy childhood. My dad was the coach of most of my teams at some point. I played soccer, baseball, basketball. I was very skinny, so I didn't play football that much, but we did play those other sports. Tennis was a big one. And it was very, very, very happy childhood. I have a brother. He's 4 years younger than me. And we always lived on streets with a bunch of kids. So and I'm a Gen X person. So it was very much like come home from school by yourself, go out in the neighborhood. Don't come home till the streetlights come on. When the streetlights come on, dinner will be ready. And then you get in a bath, do your homework and go to bed and do the same thing the next day. So I heard someone describe it as an endless game of Survivor at one point. And I was like, so that was pretty much it. We had rock fights and walk through the woods. And then later on I had motorcycles and we would, take those through the trails and stuff like that. And it was just a very active, very happy childhood from what I can say.
I love it. So in high school, fast forward to high school, mm-hmm. you said you're into sports. Tell me about, did you do sports in high school?
I did. In fact, the big disruption in high school was after my freshman year. So you mentioned Dr. O'Malley. He and I grew up together. We played soccer since we were 7 together. And so my freshman year in high school, he and I played on the high school team and we went to the state finals. And the reason for that is a bunch of us guys had played together just all of our lives, pretty much. And had a great time. But then at the end of my freshman year, my dad took a job in Raleigh, North Carolina. And so my family moved and I hit reset, started all over. So I was a budding soccer star. When I say star, I mean, just a member of a really successful team.
Hey, come on. Nobody's going to go back and fact check this, dude. You'd go ahead and you be who you know you were.
Yeah. Well, I was headed that way. I wasn't that way yet, but and then the kind of I felt like the rug got pulled out from under me because I'd been friends with these people for my whole life, and I'd gone to the same church, gone to the same school, everything, and now I was really starting over with no friends, and so soccer was the my barrier to entry to finding my new friends. And so I remember the summer between my freshman and sophomore year, we went up to Raleigh, and the soccer coach was having a summer camp, and I got into that summer camp, and that's where I met two of my lifelong friends. In fact, one of the guys I met at that summer camp, I still talk to almost every week, which is very rare. He and I are going on, 40 years of doing this together. We've seen our kids grow up. We've been to the weddings. We've had parents pass away. We've just been through it all. And it's really funny how that's how you're placed in those situations. And I would have never met the guy had I not moved schools, obviously. But that first meeting, he literally was one of the first two people I met in my new school, and we're still friends to this day, all these years later. But I did play soccer. I was all conference, all state one year. I played tennis as well. So at high school, you kind of have to choose. You can't play baseball and tennis because they're happening at the same time. And so my friend Chad, who I met, the guy I was telling you about, he played tennis. He was a really good tennis player. So he was number one seed. I was number two seed. He was the starting left half on the soccer team. I was the starting center half. And we just had that relationship where everything we did was together. And soccer and tennis got us through the trying years of high school.
So you get through high school. Did you have any concept of where you thought your life might be? So as a 17, 18-year-old, where you thought you might be when you're 27 or 28 years old?
Um, I won't say I didn't have goals, but I kind of was, well, and I'll be honest, like when my parents' marriage started struggling my senior year in high school, and started to become very obvious. So life at home got a little there was a lot of friction between me and my dad, between me and my mom, and it ultimately became between me and my brother, and we're all good now. But there was a lot of friction. So I think when I was going from 17 to 18, looking much past the ultimate goal of let's get out of the house, it was really challenging for me to see what I might be doing at 27. I just knew I wanted to be out on my own. I wanted to, pave my own way. I had some ideas of what that looked like, but I didn't really have a clear vision for life in at 30 or at 27. I think in my senior yearbook, they asked me what I would be doing 10 years from now, and I told them I would be an actor. Of course, I'm not, but
Yeah.
that was where my mind was, and I think looking back, what I meant by that was I wanted a life of excitement. I wanted a life of adventure, and where things were new. I didn't want to go sit in an office at that point very much. So yeah, so it was a really interesting time to say, you should be having all these goals. You should be having clear vision, or at least some sort of inclination of what you're going to be studying. And I just didn't have any of that. All I knew is I wanted to go have fun, and I wanted to get out of my house. And that was what I did.
That's kind of fascinating. And we might come back to it. This notion of a high school athlete who, according to what you've told me so far, didn't have a resume or a background in acting.
Mm-mm.
But when asked what you wanted to be doing in the future, you suggested that maybe it was to be an actor. And maybe,
Mhm.
just maybe, a good therapist might lead you to the place of discovering that that had in fact been what you had been doing. And
Absolutely.
and you just didn't know how to quit doing it. But
Hmm.
let's say so this is really fascinating. So you didn't say in your sophomore year, I'm going to be an attorney, or I'm going to be a doctor, or I'm going to be a public company accountant. You just kind of got to your senior year, and it's like, well, I probably better go to, according to my mom, to be successful, like my dad,
Hmm.
I need to get a college degree or a college education. And so by default, then, just by that's what you are supposed to do, that's what you did. And where did you end up?
Well, there's a really interesting story with that. So I did go to college by a favor from my father. He called the admissions and said, "Please just interview the kid. He's a good kid. He doesn't show very much intelligence on paper at this point, but I have average grades. But he's a good kid." So I ended up getting into Appalachian State in Western North Carolina, and it was a very different college back then. This was the early '90s. And then my freshman year, my parents they did divorce, and it was kind of a little bit messy for the family. And my sophomore year, I ended up failing out of that college. And so I went to school with the idea of I'm going to get an education because mom said to do to get a good job. And then life happens in that moment, and I just start rebelling against everything. And I think I was a big snowboarder. And so I think I bought a season pass my sophomore year. And there were 2 days that I didn't snowboard. That was Thanksgiving Day and Christmas Day were the only 2 days I wasn't on the mountain. At the sacrifice of my studies, at the sacrifice of relationships, at the sacrifice of school, that was the only place I found peace. I found confidence. I found predictability. I found stability. Um, and so it's really funny. So I failed out of college, moved back in with my father, who now had moved on into a new relationship, started driving a forklift because my dad said, you got to get a job. You can't just stay here. You got to get a job. Started driving a forklift in a warehouse, got back into community college. And it was in community college where I ran into someone who I knew in high school. And she looked at me, and we didn't know each other well. We just kind of knew. I was kind of friendly with everyone. I didn't really have any enemies in high school. Everyone kind of, I just could, I was a chameleon. I could fit in with anybody. And she looked at me and she said, Kevin Hoover, what are you doing here at the community college? And I said, what do you mean? Like, I'm here, going to college, and she said, but you were like, had it all figured out, the sports, the this, the that. She just couldn't believe that I was at the same place she was. And I thought that was just the most bizarre thing. I didn't know at the time, but that kind of struck me. And I said, okay, that plus the forklift job kind of pushed me back. And I ended up getting back into school at North Carolina State after 2 quarters in community college, got my grades up high enough. NC State decided that if I took a full course load for all summer one year and got at least a 3.0, they would let me in on a full-time basis. And so I worked full-time, went to school full-time, got a 3.12 or something, just barely eked over that mark, and got into NC State and graduated from North Carolina State with a degree, Bachelor of Arts. So college to me was the proving ground of like what I can do on my own. And I'll say, my first 2 years of college, my dad paid for. And then after I failed out, he and I had a conversation, and he was willing, but I said, if I go back, I need to pay for it. So my last 2 years of school, I ended up taking out student loans and paying for them myself, which put a little gravity on the situation, put a little, I cared about it a little more. And so that was my college experience. But then at the end of college, I still was like, I want to have fun. I don't want to get a job, like a real job. So my first job out of college was a tour guide for snowboarding tours in West Virginia.
Oh man. So two things. I have to insert a joke from Dumb and Dumber, which is there's no place to
Please.
get a job around here unless you want to work 40 hours a week.
Exactly.
Who wants to do that?
Yeah, that's exactly
Look,
my mindset.
I have to go back to this. I have to go back to this. Kevin Hoover, what are you doing here?
Yeah, can you believe that?
No, and I mean, there's a number of ways that question can be asked.
Yes.
What are you doing here? What are you doing here? But the way you even said it was, what are you doing here? And it sounds to me like that's the first time it dawned on you that maybe the world views you as someone, something with potential more than what you were giving yourself credit for.
Yes, indeed.
Do you remember what her name was?
Tanya.
Have you ever
Oh.
told Tanya the story?
No, I haven't. I've shared it a few times. And we lost touch. I should probably seek her out on social media and things like that. But I remember that day vividly, and it was that exact, like, I guess the perception was I didn't have problems. I was queued up for bigger things in life, or whatever her perception of me was. Because, like I said, we knew each other, but we didn't hang out. We had a couple classes together probably. But yeah, that was the first time where I was like, oh wow, the perception of me versus what I feel and what I'm going through are a little different. And I knew I was there because that's where I should be in the moment. But she hadn't seen me in a couple years, 3 years, 4 years, something like that, and a lot had happened in those 4 years. And so here I am, and but I think that was a transitional moment for me where it was like, what are you doing here? That was the question for me. What am I doing here? And I think it was about that point where I was like, I need to get my degree, because that seems to be the way into whatever's next for me.
Yeah, man. Someday, I don't know you well, but I know you well enough, I think already, to say that someday you're going to find Tanya and you're going to tell her, you're going to ask her to listen to this podcast. Unprompted.
Yeah.
You brought her up about how she showed up in a day she won't remember. But
Yeah.
that day in a moment changed the trajectory of the rest of your life so profoundly.
Mm-hmm.
by just being this mirror for you to cause you to take a step back and say, wait a minute, what did she mean by that? And was she right?
Mm.
Was she right? Am I underperforming my own capabilities here? And I think that's so fascinating because we've all got that. Every single person who's listening to this podcast right now has that moment, that thing that somebody said that other person won't even remember having suggested to you that changed the course of their life. I've got one. I've got one that I know immediately. And ironically, true story, it was my second sophomore year of college when it happened to me. And I'm telling you, I was on a nowhere road. I was going nowhere fast. I was farming. I was still at the farm. I was doing that. But man, I was working in a club, pretty much flunking out of school. I had gotten into alcohol further than anybody probably should at age 21. And I was just going nowhere. And my family, like we always do, send out this Christmas card. And so I was home for Thanksgiving. We took a Thanksgiving picture of the family. My mom got it developed. She sent out 300 pictures with a family letter like you did back in the 1990s. And that was that. I didn't think anything of it until I came home from college and like I said, I was home to work on the farm and I saw a light flashing, the old fashioned answering machine, where you had a tape in it and the whole thing. And it was flashing. So I'm like, well, I'll see who called and we'll take a note for whoever it's for. And I listened to it and it was one of my dad's buddies. Eldon was his name. And Eldon, not knowing that I was going to be the one receiving this message, is as soon as the phone beeps, he's laughing. And he's like, oh my gosh, Larry, Larry's my dad. Larry, I got your Christmas card. I saw that boy of yours. Boy, he's a good little eater. Wow. The point is, I had put on all sorts of weight. And in every picture prior to that, I was the athlete. I was fit. Going back to acting an image, the image she had of you didn't fit the narrative of where you were on that day. The image Eldon had of me didn't fit where I was on that day. And when the moment I heard that, something in me changed. I saw myself different. And it changed the trajectory of that day, certainly that month, represents the most I ever weighed and the most I've ever drank in any month in my life because it changed in that moment. And Eldon, who passed away many years ago now, would have had no idea that this little voice message that he left for my dad as a joke altered the course of my life.
That's amazing.
Let's get to college. You've gone. Let's get through college. You're through college. Now you're like, okay, crap. I suppose I better work 40 hours. The adventure's over. Tell me what you did, because it seems to me in the 40 minutes you and I have already talked, this gets kind of juicy in here in some of the stuff you get to do. So what happens?
Well, it's, I think the first job was, like I said, I was a pro snowboarder basically. And I traveled every week, went to different mountains and took groups snowboarding and skiing, horseback riding, whitewater rafting, the whole nine. And it was a load of fun, but you don't make a lot of money doing that. And so I kind of got to the point where I was like, all right, I'm out on my own, and rent is what rent is at that point. And I learned how to do a lot of really cool things, met a lot of really cool people, but ultimately it was a travel job that wasn't going anywhere. It wasn't like there was a next step for me because it was a small company. So I did that. And then after that, I got what I consider my first real sales job. It was inside sales for an architectural design firm. And so I sold the columns for that company. And they made these columns, but they were made of synthetic, so they had a little more durability. And this was in the late 90s. So it was very, very popular. And I actually got to I still talk about it. So it was inside sales, but this proposal or this inquiry came across my desk one day. And it was this company who was building a resort in the Bahamas, and they needed all these columns. I think it was like 750 columns or something like that. I was like, oh, this is juicy. This is good. This is good commission. This is going to be good money. Well, I ended up bidding the job and getting the job, and that ended up being the Atlantis Resort in the Bahamas. So I helped design and deliver all the columns on the Atlantis Resort as it sits today. And that was great fun. And then Loretta Lynn calls, and I get to do the columns on her house, and that's amazing. She sent me a Christmas card. I never talked to her. I never met her or anything like that, but she loved the columns, so she sent me a Christmas card. Thanks, Kevin, for all your work. Love, Loretta Lynn. I was like, that's amazing. That 70s show called, and they wanted some columns for their sets, and I got to do all that. So it was really my first, when you go back of how do you get into to your purpose, that was really the first job that I was like, oh, wow, I can reach beyond my zip code and beyond my city and beyond my town and still do business. And this was way before social media or cell phones are what they are today. And that was my next job. And then that was the job that really broke open what I consider to be a career path. And it wasn't long after that job, because I did so many high profile jobs, I ended up getting recruited by a .com company out of New York City. And this was during the .com boom, when everybody, the VCs were handing out money to .coms like it was birthday cake. And most CEOs were less than 26 years old, and so it was that kind of world. So I remember that day when I was living in Wilmington working for the column company. They flew me to New York. I met with the person on the Upper East Side. She said, "How much would it take for you to move in 2 weeks to do this job for us, to be the salesperson for us in New York?" And I had no idea. I hadn't even considered like moving to New York at that time.
You were living where? You were living where at this point?
In North Carolina, in Wilmington.
You were still in North Carolina. Okay.
Yeah.
So this is a big move then.
Big move, and I was now 26. So it was about, 10 years after the time we talked about before, where I had no vision. And so she said, how much would it take for you to move to do this job for us in about 2 or 3 weeks? I had no idea. I had no concept of what it cost to live in New York. I had friends that lived up there, one friend that lived up there. So I'd been there before. And I just said $5,000. And she pulled out a checkbook and wrote me a check for $5,000 and said, "See you in 2 weeks." And I remember walking I was staying with a friend of mine who lived in Soho. I was at like 70 something in Lexington. So I was 80 blocks away from where I was staying. And I walked all the way back because I was just like, what just happened? What's going on? What's the deal here? I was just on such a high. And so that was my first experience where I moved to New York, worked this job, got to travel to New Orleans, San Francisco, do all these things with this .com company, this tech company. And I was like, this is kind of for me. I like this pace of life, and ended up staying in New York for almost a decade and doing a lot of different things. But that was like coming out of college, like that was the first 3 things that happened. I did the rebellious snowboarding job, had a wake up call, said, I better get my act together. I got to get some real money coming in, did the architectural design job in sales. And from there, I got recruited to New York, and that was a game changer.
I mean, it makes perfect sense. Snowboarding to architectural design to .coms. I mean,
yeah, that's the path.
You go to college for that, right?
That's how you do it.
All right. Well, somehow, somewhere, you end up working for celebrity chefs. How do you get from .com to this next kind of as an outsider looking in, it's like, what? How does this work? From you looking back, I know it makes perfect sense. That's how this works. But connect the dots to what happens next.
So interesting story. So with the .com job, as most .coms did, we got our pink slips. We went out of business. I can't. There's no other way to put it. And so there was a point in time where I walked in the office one day and they brought 20 or 30 of us back at a time and announced, "Here are your pink slips. Here's your severance. Best of luck to you." And that was that. That was also the year before 9/11. So the economy was kind of tough at that point. So I was out of a job and I was trying to find another job. And because of the .com, the tech bust in New York City, there were 1,000 people for every job that was open. And most of them were more qualified than me, in my opinion, at the time. And so I had to go to waiting tables just to pay rent. And I got a job at this, it was Atlantic Grill on the Upper East Side as a waiter. And I lived at First and First, and this was at like 73rd and 2nd or something like that. So it was a commute up the road. And I started waiting tables again. And I had waited tables in college at a place in Raleigh called 42nd Street Oyster Bar. And I must have interviewed at 20 or 30 places, restaurants. And at that time, they were like, if you don't have New York experience, because there were so many people in the New York market, we're not going to hire you. So if you've never waited tables in New York, we're not even going to talk to you. And I was like, well, there's got to be a way. So I remembered that my restaurant that I worked at in college was called 42nd Street Oyster Bar. And on my resume, I put Raleigh, North Carolina. So I just deleted Raleigh, North Carolina. I just said, hey, I worked at 42nd Street Oyster Bar. First job, got it. So I did a little bit of clever manipulating of my experience. And when I got into that job, it was with a larger restaurant group. I did a really great job, I think, because they invited me to to be a server, a captain, on New Year's Eve on opening night of the W Hotel Times Square. And so during that time, 9/11 had happened. I was a server. It was a really rough go in New York. And the first New Year's Eve after 9/11, I was on the opening staff for the W Hotel in Times Square. And that kind of made me very visible. It kind of also anchored in the fact that I know a lot about food and wine and service and things like that. And my background in business, I knew the numbers, all that stuff. And so that was kind of the start of me trudging through the food system, the food industry, and ultimately landed up with two celebrity chefs as a beverage director for their business.
All right. Before we go there, I need to go back just for a moment
Sure.
to the pink slip day.
Yeah.
You got to New York because somebody wrote you a $5,000 check and you couldn't, it was easy, obvious, and free. I mean, literally, and it was better than free. It was compensated. And it was
Yeah.
easy because this lady said, we want you. And it was obvious because she's got a job and it was compensated. And you go and you do that. And like .coms do, they don't work a lot of the times, a lot of startups.
Mhm.
On that day, on pink slip day and the week after, because you get a little severance, some time to reflect. Did you give any thought to leaving New York, saying, "Well, look, I gave it a run. I'm out of here," or what? What? Just give me a little flavor for what it is you were wrestling with when you now find yourself in New York out of a job.
So there's this no, I never thought about leaving New York at that time. And I think the reason was it would have been an element of failure. I always wanted to go home like the kid who made it in the big city. I never, and I wasn't ready to give that up yet. As I'm sure it sounds almost childish at this point to talk about that, but that was very true. I felt like if I tucked tail and went home, I was defeated and I had failed. And I wasn't ready to digest that just yet. So I was like, I'm going to fight it out. And honestly, there were the first 2 weeks, it was great because I was still getting severance, and my severance, ended very quickly because I was, relatively new to the company, so somewhat new. But I would have given anything to have that $5,000 check back at that point, you know. And so I never thought about leaving New York. I just said I've got to figure this out, and things got really tough. And my dad actually did the biggest favor for me during that time. My rent was $700 a month, and I lived in a closet. And when I say closet, I mean my bed touched one wall. There was a night table beside my bed, and the night table touched the other wall. And so I put my foot on the wall to tie my shoes every day. That's how small my room was, and that was $700. At that time, it's probably much more now. But I called my dad and I said, "Hey, listen, I'm in a kind of a tough spot. I just need some. I need to get over this hump. Can you send me some money?" And my dad said, "No." He said, "You can figure it out, or you can come home." He said, "I will buy you a plane ticket home, but I'm not going to send you any cash."
Did that
And
surprise you?
it did. It did. It did. But I mean, it did. But I think that some part of me almost expected it, and some part of me almost welcomed it. Because I think when you go through life, and it's just going back to what Tanya said, what are you doing here? We lived a upper middle income family. We didn't want for anything as kids. We had food, we had shelter, we had clothes. I wouldn't call us wealthy in any stretch of the imagination, but all the needs were met. If we wanted to go on vacation, we did all of that. And so I never really had, what I would consider a real struggle, where you've got to figure it out or you don't eat. Because there was always an element of, I'll just drive home. Well, this was not that. I didn't have a car. I lived in New York City. You didn't need a car. So driving home wasn't an option. And my dad gave me the ultimate: accept your failure or figure it out. Those were the only two options that I had. And I said, well, I'm going to figure this out. And that's when I started really saying, okay, what job can I make the most money in the least amount of time? And it was waiting tables in New York. And so that's kind of what pushed that. It was the the stubbornness to not accept failure just yet and press on and figure it out. But it ultimately, it ended up proving to myself what I can do and what I'm capable of. And years later, my dad said, because I've lived all over the place. So, I would on a whim move from New York to LA eventually. And my dad said, you just believe that wherever you land, you're going to figure it out. And I told him years later, I said, yeah, you know why? Because someone told me I'll buy you a plane ticket or you're going to figure it out. And I chose figure it out. So now I've got the skin that figures it out. So thank you for that, Pop. I appreciate that. So it was a great gift. It was just a great gift. It wasn't attractive at the time. I will say that. I was like, oh, I had some words, but it was a great gift in hindsight.
Most gifts are.
Yeah.
Wisdom never looks like wisdom when it's presented.
Oh man, it looks like, I don't know what it looks like. It looks like selfishness and unwillingness to help, but it ultimately is, yeah, that was a great gift. Great gift.
It looks like a lack of trust in your ability. Hey everyone, thanks for listening to Normal 40 the podcast. I just wanted to let you know that one of the questions I get asked all the time is, okay, what's next? I'm here, I'm listening. Your content is good, the podcasts are great, but what can I really do? And I tell people, I've created a community for you. And I don't advertise it very much, but I'm going to advertise it here. The community is called The Insider. If you go to my website, normal40.com, click on communities, The Insider is $25 a month, and you can cancel after the first month or after the first year or after the first decade. It's a month to month conversation. And every day I'm in there and we're communicating in a forum. And every other Thursday, we have office hours where I'm in there and the whole community shows up and we support one another through their journey. I want you to check it out. If you use code Insider Access, the first month is on me. Go to normal40.com, check out The Insider, and I'm going to see all of you on the inside. All right. I'll get you back to the podcast. Thanks for being here. I'll see all of you on the next page. So let's thank you for going back on that, dude. I think that's a fabulous adder to the story here. But now fast forward to not only did you do what your snowboarding, architectural background, and .com experience enabled you to do, the 42nd Street Oyster Bar, or whatever it's called, prepared you, this little job you had years before, prepared you to redeploy back into survival mode, which led you into the restaurant industry, which you quickly accelerated at. And you got noticed by some celebrity chefs. And that's kind of where I asked you to go back. So take us forward to what kind of the next, 5 or 10 years of your life look like in that world.
It was amazing. It was amazing. I worked for Jeffrey Zakarian, who is a judge on Chopped. If you watch the Food Network, he's still a
How did
judge.
they find you though? I need that moment, that same moment where like this gal who gave you a $5,000 check when you said when you threw out a number she gave. What was that moment where you're like, I think they really want to hire me? What was that?
I had saw that he had just opened up in a boutique hotel in Midtown Manhattan, so it was getting a lot of attention. And this was back in the day where the food reviews came out on Wednesday, and if you got a bad review, there's a good chance you're going out of business. It was when, the celebrity chef was just coming, like Bobby Flay was not Bobby Flay today. He was just becoming Bobby Flay. So it was very exciting. And I was looking at all this going on, and I was like, I want to be a part of that wave somehow. So I forget what job I was doing at the time. I was with, who was I with? Oh, I was kind of floundering around a little bit. And so I was kind of bouncing from job to job, trying to search it out. So they put a post up on some job board, and I went and applied for it, and they called me for an interview, and I went for an interview, and it was one of those, I guess I'm pretty likable. I don't know, but they just offered me the job on the spot, and they were like, but it wasn't the job. They said, we've got an opening we want you to fill, and we want you to be our breakfast manager because we're in a hotel. And I was like, oh, well, that's not really my jam, but if it's my way in, okay, I'll do it. So I got in with Jeffrey's team, and it wasn't long after that they offered me the beverage director job. So I was still working breakfast in the hotel, but I was actually managing everything except the wine list because they had a sommelier that did that. And that was my first introduction to this high level food. And during that job, we had celebrities, we did Bobby Flay's bachelor lunch for, I think, his first wedding. We did a lot of stuff for Tiffany and Company. We did, Jay-Z had a party there one night. Like, it was just this high visibility environment. And I wore a suit every day, and I just felt important. And I felt like, it was still back in the days where we had a maitre d'. So everyone, would come in, and it felt like a big deal. And it was kind of like a play in a lot of ways. When we go back to that idea of 17-year-old me saying I want to be an actor, well, every day I went to work and I put on a show, and that's what it was. And it just kept that vibe going for whatever the audience was at the table. You're dealing with CEOs of Bank of America. You're dealing with celebrities. I had tea with Renee Zellweger one day because she was just there, and I was like, how are you? And she was like, sit down, let's chat. I was like, that's amazing. Again, one of those days where I would have never had that opportunity. And there's no doubt she doesn't remember that at all. It was 5 minutes, but that put me in a world of like, okay, I'm visible now, and I feel like I'm important, and I feel like I'm on some sort of even playing field, even though I was still in service. And it just kind of stroked the ego a lot. And because it stroked the ego on that high of a level, I stayed in that thankless job for over a decade, in different capacities. But that was kind of my breach into it. And then when I kind of took a hiatus from that, got burned out, and then I got contacted by Chef Morimoto's people. So there was Masaharu Morimoto, he's an Iron Chef from Japan, opened up a restaurant in Philly and needed a beverage director for that. And they offered me that job. And I went and did that. And that I love that job. That was an amazing job. He's an amazing chef. Obviously, the food was amazing. But again, you're dealing with people who have saved up to eat at your restaurant. Eating at our restaurant cost more than a TV. So it was a big deal. And I felt important and I felt like my suit meant something and my work meant something. And I was getting a couple of awards and things like that. And so it was just it was a very fun experience where I got to eat a lot of food that I wouldn't have had the chance to do otherwise. I probably drank more wine than I should. But it was a load of fun. And I really treasure those moments.
How many hours a week were you working? So two questions. How old were you
Yeah.
at this point ish? Give me some ranges. And how many hours a week were you working?
So I started waiting tables at the first job after the .com. I was 28 when I went back to waiting tables. So that felt like a defeat in and of itself because no one goes to kindergarten and says, I'd like to be a waiter when I grow up. No one says that, so that felt like a defeat. So I legitimized it by becoming as good as I could be at that job so that I could be more. And then I ended up leaving that industry about 10 years later. Yeah, I was 39. So it lasted almost all of my 30s. And I was working 50 to 70 hours a week, minimum 50.
And your hours were what times of day were you working in weekends?
Oh, it was, I didn't come home for like 5 holidays in a row because I was working. And most jobs, I think when I was at the Times Square, we closed the restaurant at 1 a.m. So I was working till 3 or 4 in the morning every day. And I remember vividly, like I would go into work, we'd close down, I'd leave work at 3 o'clock. I'd go to this little French cafe that was open 24 hours. I'd have a full meal and a bottle of wine with all my friends, roll home around 5 or 6, go to sleep, wake up at 2, go back to work at 3, same thing over at Groundhog Day. When I left the restaurant industry, my last job, our restaurant closed at like 10 or 11. So I was home at midnight or 1 on days that I closed. It was a little more manageable, but still not as manageable. So you learn to operate on these vampire hours where you've got to force yourself to be up and operating during daylight hours. And none of your friends are on that schedule. None of your, Mom, I can't come home for Christmas because I've got to work Christmas Eve and Christmas Day in New York. So I don't know what you want me to do. Right.
Yeah. Can't you see how successful I am, Mom? Look at the restaurants I'm in. I've got to be here. This place won't survive without me. I'm integral.
Need me. They need me. Yeah. That was exactly the vibe.
It goes back to 6 words you said that hit me like a ton of bricks. It felt like my suit meant something.
Yeah.
That's your suit talking to your mom.
Yep.
And we all been there, man. We've all been there. Every single person listening to this podcast either can think of a suit and tie, or they can think of a white robe and patience. That was the big image thing that kept him away. And by the way, I don't criticize that. I think that there's a time in your 20s and your 30s when that's exactly what you're supposed to do. That is exactly what you're wired to do, meant to do, have the energy to do, you're designed to do, and you go out and you prove it. And this is you proving it to your dad, proving it to yourself, proving it to everyone that your suit does mean something. And proving it to, what's her name? The gal who said, what are you doing here? Tanya, proving it to Tanya. She was right. This is what you're doing here. And I think that's fantastic. But there's a time when that ends too. There's a time when something usually comes along. And it's usually not wisdom that you have in your mind or wisdom that somebody can grant you because you're still a dude in a suit. You can't grab it yet. Yeah. What was there something? Well, let me just ask it like this. How did you get out of that? And where did you end up next?
There's a lot that I regret in life. This is not one of those moments. I am grateful that I had this moment. So when I was at my last job in Philadelphia, I was being positioned to be the corporate beverage director. So I would have had 20 restaurants up and down the East Coast that I would have been in charge of. And it was a very big honor, but that also meant scaling back from restaurant hours to more corporate hours. And I was like, this is amazing, and they were very vocal about you're the next guy. We've got 90 days. We're kind of moving you in. And about 2 months earlier, there was a culinary school down the street from my apartment in Philly. And I'd met one of the directors there and he knew where I worked. And he said, hey, would you be interested in teaching a business class for us? It won't interfere with your work. It's early in the morning. And I was thinking, that would be fun and it would get me out of bed early. So I would have to wake up early. I would have to be productive in my day. And so I was teaching culinary school 2 days a week, business class in the morning, and then pursuing this corporate beverage director job during my regular gig. And during that time, I fell back in love with teaching, or fell in love with teaching. And I looked up the corporate ladder of people in that particular company, and I was like, I don't see it. There's no lighthouse. Like, I don't see someone living the life that I want that's on the next level. I see a lot of addiction. I see a lot of broken homes and marriages. I see a lot of misery. I see a lot of adultery. I see a lot of those things that seemed really fun when you're 24, perhaps. But now in my mid to late 30s, I kind of was like, I'd like to meet someone and start a family and do all these things. In fact, at this time, I had met my wife, and she wasn't my wife then, but she was about to be. And I just looked up the corporate ladder, and I was like, I don't think that's what I want for my life.
Yeah, man.
And
It
and
was your rocket ship to nowhere. It was your
yeah,
first grade multiplication table
yeah,
rocket ship to I don't want this.
I
I
don't
thought
want
that'd be
this.
different.
Yeah.
That's
And it,
fascinating.
it was divine intervention because I had this culinary school experience where I was like, oh, I like doing that. And I'm still in touch with some of the kids that were in my class during that time. I mean, that was so many years ago, and I just really enjoyed that. And so as you put those two together at the same time, it's funny how God and the universe works. You put those in your life at the same time, and it's almost a no-brainer decision. And I looked at my wife at that point. I said, I think we got to get out of here and hit reset on everything. And that's what we did.
All right. So your wife is Suzanne.
Mhm.
Tell me about meeting Suzanne. Where were you at and what was going on in your world at that point? And then let's get into the next chapter of your life.
The next chapter. I wasn't her direct boss, but I was a director at one of the places
Uh-oh,
she worked.
scandal, scandal. All
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. So I
This
was
is the
very,
point. This is where the questions come out that you want me to edit out later. All right, let's hear
yeah,
it.
yeah.
Full
Well,
disclosure.
I could say that this was one of the moments where I actually acted ethically, responsibly, and like a good human. So I kind of saw this person, and I kept my distance, and decided that I wasn't going to pursue it, and it just wouldn't go away. My attention towards her just wouldn't go away. So ultimately, I ended up quitting that job. The day I quit, I called her and asked her out, and we went on a date. And the rest, they say, is history. But we met at one of her jobs, and then before the Philly job came up, and I think it was 2 weeks after our first date, they called and offered me the job in Philadelphia. And I said, I've got to take this job. I can't not. And I said, why don't you come with me? Thinking I've a big important suit. Come with me.
Yeah.
And she said, absolutely not. I said, okay. So we kept dating. We did distance for a year. And I said, if she moves to Philly, I'll ask her to marry me. So we did long distance for 1 year. We traveled about every month, maybe multiple times a month. She moved to Philadelphia, moved in with me. A month later, we went to Las Vegas for a wedding, and I asked her to marry me in the Grand Canyon while we were out there. And that was that. So that's how. And she's one of the most influential people in my life in many, many ways. But again, it was going back to the idea, my dad told me no, and she told me no as well. And that's what even drew me in closer to her. So when I left town to go to this job, I said, I'm not going to do anything to mess this up. I'm going to work and I'm coming home. That's it. I never went out. I never went to a movie by myself. I never did any of that. I made sure that I was accountable to what the future might hold to that relationship, because she said initially, no, I'm not going to move there with you yet. I said, okay, fair enough. So here we are.
So you're clearly a dude who responds well to no. So that's we can chalk that up.
Yeah.
Which is a compliment, by the way. Okay,
Good.
so you guys, where do you live now?
We're in South Carolina.
Okay, so you're back. You're
Back in
in
the
South
Carolinas.
Carolina, different Carolina.
Yeah.
Okay, so now you guys are married,
Mhm.
and it's time to start a family. Tell me about it.
So our caveat when we left Philadelphia was neither one of us can work in hospitality. So we've got to figure out a life outside of waiting tables and running restaurants and hotels. And the reason for that is because we wanted to start a family. It's really hard. I don't know how people do it. I didn't see that being the life I wanted for my family. So we did. So we had a few odd jobs, and then probably 2 years after we moved back, this was around 2015, we got pregnant with my son. And at that time, I was doing video production for a company that was doing coaching events. And so now they do Russell Brunson's events, they do Tony Robbins events. That's the company that I was working for, and I had never heard of coaching at all. And so I was working for them, and it was a salary job, benefits. I traveled a lot, which I didn't care for, but it was okay. It was stability, and it wasn't in restaurants. So I knew I had the holidays off. I had nights off if I wasn't traveling, and so it ended up it was a decent job at that point for us, and that's how we brought our son into the world. She was working at a bank, as a teller, and that's kind of how we started our family, with those two stable jobs. And if there's one thing I've learned about stable jobs, is they're not as stable for you as they are for the company. And so my son was born in February of 2015, and in December of 2015, a week before I got my end of year bonus and we went on holiday break, I was called into the boss's office and he fired me. And so I was a new dad. My son wasn't even one. This was the first Christmas with my little boy. And I was about to get, and money was tight. So we were about to get this check that we needed to pay our rent and to buy gifts and to put food on the table. And that was taken away. I didn't get my bonus check. I didn't get a severance. I was just let go. And that hit me very hard as a new dad. It was very difficult to get over that, but I collected myself and had a little pity party, did all the things.
Tell me about tell me about the drive home from that day. Not the first time you had a pink slip. It happened once
Yeah.
before in the .com, but at least you got a severance from a bankrupt company. And we
Yeah.
didn't even get
Yeah.
that here. Tell me about that
Didn't get
drive home
that.
and what Suzanne said.
So and I think back to this all the time about leadership, because they called me into the office at Friday at 5 p.m. And I was like, you knew at 10 a.m. that this was going to happen. And you let me work the whole week, probably knowing this was the outcome. And so I was a little angry. I called my wife and she was the best about it, obviously upset, but she saw that I was upset. I just felt defeated. I cried most of the way. I didn't talk very long with my wife. I just said, I'm on my way home, but they fired me, and I'll see you when I get home. And then I just got really, I didn't, I didn't want to talk to anybody else. I was really angry, really disappointed in myself. But then I think back, I think part of me was kind of relieved in one sense, because that job there was nowhere to go. It wasn't like I was growing into something better. It was just a job. It was a salary. And the drive home was hard. I remember this vividly. I got home. I walked through our garage. We had a little door that connected the garage to the kitchen. I walked in the kitchen, and the first person I saw was my wife, obviously, and she gave me, still to this day, and she has not been able to duplicate this kind of hug that she gave me. And it was just the most like, it's going to be okay hug I've ever gotten in my life. And she allowed me time to kind of figure it out, and time that we didn't have. And she allowed me time to kind of collect myself and not go back into restaurants and all that. And it was ended up being a beautiful part of our marriage. It was not a beautiful part of my career or part of my life. It was a beautiful part of our marriage, that my son was there for. And so it was it was a mindset boot camp that Christmas.
Oddly, probably one of the better, more present Christmases you've ever had.
Oddly, yes, it was. Um, I remember being very, almost overcome with joy that Christmas. I've got a picture I have of my son, and it's him during that Christmas, and he wasn't even a year old yet. So he's just kind of rolling around the floor, but he grabbed the bottom of our Christmas tree and was just looking at the lights with this face of like, what in the world is this stuff? This just face of wonder. And I was like, if I'm going to make it 18 years raising a young man, I've got to see the world through his eyes. I've got to see what he sees in some way. And I remember sitting on our couch watching him do that. And I was kind of making sure he wasn't, going to hurt himself or anything, but just seeing his face look up like wide eyed at these Christmas lights. And I just remember making the choice in that moment, like whatever happens, I've got to see through his eyes in some way at every point in time, so that I can guide him in the right way. And that was the biggest gift, because I probably would have been thinking about work or other things if I hadn't been fired from a job.
How much time did you take after being let go until you started what was next?
I won't say I took any time. I will say it took me about 6 weeks to figure out what I was going to do next.
Talk about those 6 weeks. Talk about this range of emotions? Because I want to say two things.
Mhm.
One, I hear again and again from my clients who were let go that very quickly they felt relief. On day one, it's miserable because it's personal and it's
Right.
hurtful and it's scary and it's embarrassing.
Hmm.
But very quickly after they move past that, it's relief, it's optimism, it's excitement, and it's joy, and there's this clean break. And so and then they confess, I don't think I'd have done it. I don't think I would have quit. I would have stayed and kept, even though I knew it wasn't where I belonged. I knew that
Yes.
it didn't have a future. I would have been
Yeah.
there at least a year, if not years. And boy, I can say the same thing about me too.
Hmm.
So there's that. But then in that time, when you kind of come out the other side and you realize, wait a minute, there's a gift in here somewhere. And you talked about it with with Baxley and staring up at a Christmas tree, and you started to see that appreciation and that joy. Um, and then you said it took 6 weeks. What was going on in that 6 weeks? What were you really calculating out different than what you were just 6 weeks before that?
I wish I could share the optimism story with you, but I can't. I didn't experience that at all. I experienced spiritual rock bottom. I experienced habits that I had to break very quickly. There was a lot of numbing, not admitting that I had no clue what I was doing at this point. I had had a successful career in hospitality. I had the suit to prove it. And now I'm a father and I'm a failure. That was how I was thinking. And I think so obviously I had to put food on the table. So I applied for unemployment. The old company fought that unemployment. Ultimately, I won. And the most humbling time was when you have to go and receive a handout from someone. For me, that was very humbling, and it became just something that kept pushing me down and pushing me down even further emotionally. So I didn't experience gratitude of being let go just yet. It came later. I didn't experience optimism. I experienced a mini spiral that lasted probably 4 or 5 of those 6 weeks. And um, getting to the point where my wife started making comments like, I love you, but this behavior is not what we're about. She would never say it like that, but that was kind of the nod and the look I was getting, and I knew it. And so
How bad did it get in here?
it got pretty
How
bad.
bad did it get?
I was drinking every day. Not to a point of, I don't want to justify it, but I was never angry or belligerent or doing stupid things, as far as like driving my son or anything. I never did any of that. It was always just, wine at the house, and one bottle of wine led to another beer, and then it led to a hangover, and then that was that. And my wife went to work, and I was with my son, and I just didn't enjoy that part of it. But even more so than that, it was the self-talk that was going on in my head that said, "You've come so you used to run restaurants on Park Avenue. Look at you now. You're nothing. You're nothing." Without that suit on, you're nothing. That was kind of the self-talk that was going on. And I think, I've had a lot of people who battle addiction seriously, real addictions, and they talk about the point of rock bottom. And I do think that was an emotional rock bottom for me, where I came to terms with, what am I doing here? Not on the sense of for money. What am I doing here as a human, as a man, as a father, as a husband? Like, what do I stand for?
So who?
And go ahead.
Well, here we go again. I would imagine that either something happened, in a previous chapter of your life. It was Tanya.
Hmm.
Uh, Kevin Hoover, what are you doing here? And you just kind of described it again. You're at
Yeah.
rock bottom. Your wife's working.
Yep.
You're talking about the person you were 1, 2, and 5 years ago versus the moment you're in now.
Yeah.
And you had this realization at some point. It dawned on you again, Kevin Hoover, what are you doing here?
Hmm.
How, talk to me about how you climbed out of that.
So I was really beating myself up. I was doing a really good job of not progressing at my own will. And so I remember there was this point in time where I just realized this wasn't sustainable. my son is eventually going to see who his dad is, and this is not the version I want him to see. Luckily, he was not even a year old yet. So I had the luxury of him not remembering these days, right? But I still looked at him and said, I think we all do this. You look at your child and you say, how can I be better than my father was able to be? And my father was a great dad, but how can I be better than my father was able to be? And I looked at the version of myself that was showing up, and this wasn't it. And so I crafted a plan. I said, I think I remember this. It gets me a little bit in my gut, because I remember saying to myself, I don't know if I said it out loud, but I remember saying to myself, I don't have to have the right plan. I just have to have a plan. I can't sit here and float along life. I just have to have a plan. If I get a plan, something good will happen. It always has, right? I had a plan to get a job in architectural design. I moved to New York City. It was amazing. It spawned this whole career. So I just need a plan. I said, what can I do for as little money as possible, have something that I think is respectable, and make this work? And I was like, I know, I'll get my real estate license. So in 3 weeks, I became a realtor. I studied all day, all night. That was my focus, laser focus. And so what got me out of it was this realization of like, I don't have to have the perfect plan. I just have to have a plan and act on it. And whatever happens after that, I'm savvy enough and strong enough to deal with. So, and then I was like, okay, well, waiting tables off the table. I promised my wife, so I can't do that. What's the next best thing? Obviously, being a realtor is one step up from being a bartender. So let's do that, perceivably. So let's do that. So I got my real estate license, and so I went online and I found the number one team in my market. And my sister-in-law at the time, she said, I think they're hiring. So I reached out to them. I interviewed with one person. They offered me the job, and I went full force into that, and it was a plan. It was a plan.
How long were you successful?
Yeah. So it's funny because I got fired in December. My salary from that job that I got fired for was 40,000 a year plus benefits. So, decent living, modest living. And I got my license in February. I started with the real estate firm in March. That December, I had clocked in at $97,000 in income. So I doubled my income. That was the goal. I said, I want to try to double my income in 10 months. But I was at the office at 7 a.m. My son was young enough where we could do that. I was at the office at 7 a.m. I was really trying to like make the next Christmas not like the last. And so yeah, I did what I said I was going to do. And I became successful at real estate. And, we ended up having a good run at that.
So, and how long are you still a realtor?
I'm still licensed. I'm actually a growth coach for a real estate group. So I help realtors navigate work-life balance now. So I'm still very, very active in that community, but outside of my own properties, I don't sell any homes for anybody.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, we're going to get to that. Okay. So now you're selling real estate and you're trucking along. You've more than doubled your income. Life is good. Life is good. It's clocking along. You're back on track. You probably still get to wear a suit and feel good and do all the things.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'd imagine, well, I know that at some point in the very near future, there's another curveball that finds you and Suzanne. And if you don't mind, why don't you take us there? I think you know what I'm talking about.
I do. So I had very successful career and income in real estate from 2015. In 2018, I had remembered my days of videoing coaches, and I said, you know what, I think I'd like to start coaching people. I'm going to stay in real estate, but I'm going to start my coaching business. So in March of 2018, I took on 3 clients and started coaching as a side gig. It's just a purpose thing. I had no idea the impact that decision would have on my life, because as I'm going through this real estate and I'm making great money in real estate, I'm becoming very respected in my market, meaning people that I respect are now saying, I love it when you're the other agent on the deal, because I know this is going to be taken care of. I don't have to worry. And I was like, that's the reputation I want. And so I was starting to get that, and I was coaching people and they started having success. And then 1 year, almost to the day, from me deciding I'm going to coach people, it was March 22nd of 2019. My son was having tummy aches that week, and we couldn't figure out what it was. He was 4 years old, and it was a Friday. The doctor had said, why don't we come in for some scans? We'll figure out what's going on. It's probably nothing over the counter medicine can't cure. So we show up at the hospital for these routine scans at probably 8 in the morning, something like that. And between 8 a.m. and 11 a.m., we went from tummy ache to cancer. And it was just everything that mattered no longer mattered. Um, I could have cared less about the suit. I could have cared less about the money. I could have cared less about the deal. Um, it was all about taking this 4-year-old boy um, and figuring out how to keep him alive. And so that it's very hard to talk about still, but um, that was divine perspective that came into play because up until then in real estate, I was working for the money. I was doing a great job, but I was working for the money. And I was on the soccer field on Saturday with my son, putting the deal together because that's what you do. That's what success is. The last Saturday, a week before we were airlifted, my son was airlifted with a tumor in his abdomen with almost total kidney failure. He was minutes away from dying. And the Saturday before we were on the soccer field. So there's no preparation for this. There's no like get ready, it's coming. It's like normal, normal, normal. Everything normal is gone. Rug pulled out from under you. So I put my son and my wife on a helicopter. We had to talk them into letting my wife go because of weight and everything that goes into a life flight. And so, but he was 4, so we talked them into letting her go. She went, and so I was going to have to drive the 2 hours to the hospital in Charleston. And I came home, and my mom had this little ladder made for backs that would allow him to step up to the counter and watch me cook. And he used to stand on it all the time. I'm a big cook, obviously, my years in the food industry. So he would stand on that counter and watch me cook. And I walked home after I'd put them on the helicopter. I grabbed that ladder and collapsed. And I don't know how long I was out or what even happened, but I collapsed. It was the first time and the only time in my life that I've had a physical response to emotional pain and emotional trauma that I can remember. And I got up off the floor, not in a very like hero of the movie kind of way, and much like I did at the .com. I mean, now that I'm saying it out loud and I've talked to you about it, it's very much like I did with the .com and a couple other times. I just remember thinking like, not today. This is not today. He's not dying today. So I packed all the bags for my wife, my son. We had no idea how long we were going to be there, what even was going on at that point, and picked my sister-in-law up because the nurses had encouraged me not to drive that drive alone. And I drove the 2 hours, and we entered this world of cancer. And it was just, I'm not a fighter. I've never been punched in the face that I can remember outside of, accidental sports, but that's what it felt like. It felt like walking into that ICU area. I just felt like we don't belong here. This is not for us. This is not for us. These are the people that we help in life. This is not for us. And we went through that. And, the blessing is that I had started my coaching business a year before. So now in a matter of 4 hours, my real estate business went under because I wasn't going to be home. I just was not going to be home. And if I was home, I wasn't going to be thinking about who's buying a house. I couldn't do that. So coaching became the thing that I used to keep my family alive and keep our bills paid and keep my head above water financially. And so it was very much a gift that I had started it a year before, almost to the day. And then that day in March 2019, I actually needed it more than it needed me. I needed it.
I think it's such a poignant. You made so many fascinating observations and reflections there. I want to. There's something that I want to explore a little bit, and I guess it's me just wanting to understand. In a cancer diagnosis, typically these take weeks or months. It's like, oh, we ruled this out, we ruled this out. But it sounds like to you guys, you told me you went from being on a soccer field on a Saturday to being on a flight rescue mission the next Saturday. And to have to just show up for that, to absolutely change everything about you, everything you believe, everything that was important last Saturday doesn't even matter on this Saturday now.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about what it is when you arrived at the hospital. You did the 2-hour drive, you arrive at the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
What is the conversation that you and Suzanne have about what it's going to look like on the next Saturday?
I don't think we talked. Um, that day was such a blur. I have vague memories of it, but you know, this is the best I can say. So the oncologist was part of our trip very early. They knew it was a tumor. They knew. The director of the ER that we were at, who is a friend of Dr. O'Malley's now, and a friend of mine, Dr. Armstrong, he knew. The whole nursing staff in the ER knew that before we got on the flight, there was no question. We were so far along that there was no test that needed to be done. It was a tumor the size of a softball in a 4-year-old. That's significant. And the reason that he's feeling the way he is because it's sitting on his bladder and he's not able to get the waste out, and it's backing up and it's creating big problems. So there was no like, we need to run a test. They brought oncology in right away. And the oncologist looked at me and my wife, and I don't know exactly what they said, but they said, we're so-and-so with pediatric oncology. And my wife and I were like, what's that? Like our brains were just not, we weren't able to catch up with what was happening. It was just happening so fast. We couldn't even comprehend like basic words. So I don't think we spoke, at least not that I can remember. I'm sure we did. And we're looking at my 4-year-old, and he's connected to all these machines, and he has no idea what's going on. And we don't know how to explain it to him. And he doesn't understand at that point how severe the situation is. And I think we just kind of we're on the current. We just went where they told us to go, did what they told us to do until they actually set us down in that room. It was probably 2 days later. We had left ICU, PICU. We had left the ICU ward. We were down on the pediatric oncology hall. So we were about to get the official diagnosis that it's cancer. And we sat in this room that felt like a closet. On one side of the table, and on the other side of the table were 4 or 5 people wearing coats that were explaining the fate of our son. And you hear everything all the time, and you never know how it's going to hit you. And the head oncologist looked at us and said, your son has stage 4 rhabdomyosarcoma. Whew. And my first thought was, wonderful, let's get that out of there and let's go home. Right. I just felt like that's the next thing we're going to do. We're going to get that
plan.
Yeah, we're going to get that out of there, and we're going to go home. We got a soccer game next weekend. Right. And so we sat there, and they were very, very great about letting that process and digest. And then they threw the protocols at us, and they said, we're going to do 69 weeks of chemotherapy. We're going to do 10 days of radiation treatment on his lungs. We're going to do 7 weeks of radiation on his pelvis. We don't know how long you're going to be here. And that's our plan. And it just felt like an eternity. It felt like they had sentenced us to life in hell. And that was when we left that room. That was the first time I think my wife and I sat there, and that was the first time I remember like seeing her face in this crazy world that we were thrown into. And we just sat there and cried. And, that was because we didn't know what to do. We just knew now it was going to take a year and a half for a maybe. So a year and a half was the process, and the outcome was still a maybe. That was the best. Maybe was the best thing that we had at that point. So it was just like this. It was overwhelming. It was overwhelming. And that lasted a couple days. And then we finally started to get our feet under us and say, okay, this is what we got to do. We've got to figure this out. We've got to keep up good spirits for Baxley, because being depressed is not going to help him. Being sad is not going to help him. We have to have our sad moments, but in front of him, we've got to be lifting him up. So we kind of committed to that. And then I think again, this goes back to being an actor. I won multiple Oscars over the next 69 weeks, pretending in front of my son, we got this. We got this. And that was kind of what we did. And that was one of the hardest, transitions to really that I've ever experienced in my life. And when I say hardest, I mean, it took a lot for me to conjure the ability to be a dad that I had to be in those moments, to be a husband I had to be, to still make sure the mortgage was paid and all the things. But I had to figure it out again, and I did.
when you were telling the story about the prognosis and what the diagnosis and the prognosis and the plan with the oncologist in the room, you
Mhm.
said 69 weeks, and in my head I heard 6 to 9 weeks.
Oh yeah, no,
And it wasn't until you said it the second time with the clarification of it was going to be a year and a half. I said, no. And in my head, I'm like, no, he said 69,
yeah,
69 weeks, almost 70 weeks
yeah.
of treatments.
Hmm.
And that is, that is an eternity when you're staring at your child.
Yeah, it is.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning into the Normal 40 podcast. My name is Lon Stroschein, founder of the Normal 40, and I'm super glad you're here. Hey, really quick, by now you know it's my mission to inspire the change in 1,000 lives. And you know that this podcast is just one of the ways I'm doing it. You can also go to my website, normal40.com, and sign up for my free newsletter that comes directly to your inbox. Now, it's not really a newsletter in the sense that you're going to find much news in it. It's just letters from me to you, man, right where you are on your journey. The topics are going to vary from week to week, and I might have a guest article from time to time, but the intent of the Rambler is to meet you right where you're at, and I hope you sign up. You can also sign up for the 14 questions that changed my life. These are questions you can answer for yourself, but these are the questions I wrestled with when I was right where you are. Just a couple other things really quick. A few weeks ago, I launched my book called The Trade, and The Trade within minutes was an Amazon #1 bestseller in multiple categories, and it remains there to this day. I would love it if you'd go buy the book, not because you're going to get something out of me when you read it. It's because the book is going to get something out of you when you read it. Lastly, I've got a closed group off LinkedIn that I call the Insider, and this is where I hang out. I hang out a few times a month in cohorts and in one-on-one calls, and you can come in there and you can join the Insider and you can see for yourself that you are not alone. I would love to see you in there. Look, last thing I'll say is if you're here and this podcast is resonating with you and you can feel something burbling up, I want you to know that you are ready. You are here not because an algorithm. You are here because you are ready. And I want to help you see you through to the other side. Everyone, thanks for being here. Check out the other episodes, and I'm going to see you a little further down the road. So, did he go in? So, in that moment, did he have to do a surgery early and then procedures? So, let's kind of get through some of the emotion of, we get this, that you guys have entered your own version of hell on earth.
Hmm.
Talk to me about the first time you get to talk to him, Baxley, after surgery, and kind of how he is and how's he processing what's going on.
He was a champ the whole time, and I think my wife and I still talk to this day about the blessing of him only being 4. Because when you tell a 4-year-old cancer, if they don't have any experience with that in their life, which he didn't at that point, they don't know the possible outcomes. So he just knew that, hey, my whole family goes to the hospital every Thursday, and as long as there's no ouchies, I'm okay. But if there's an ouchie, I've got something to say about that. So he really is, didn't care. But the initial surgeries were to biopsy everything, to scan everything. They put a port in his chest so that we could access his blood very easily and quickly. Instead of doing IVs every time, they actually put a port in his chest that we could quick access if we needed. And then our job was just to keep him as normal as possible, which is an impossible feat. But his spirits stayed pretty good. He had moments where he did not like it. I think the breaking point for us was the first stint in the hospital. We were there 28 days. So we lived in the hospital for the initial 28 days. For us to go home, Suzanne and I had to learn how to administer a catheter to him so that he could relieve himself because he still wasn't urinating. And the nurses looked at us and said, we can't let you go until you and your wife can do this. And he did not like it at all. And he screamed, and it took 3 adults, 2 to hold him down and 1 to actually do the catheter. And we had to do that 4 or 5 times a day for 6 weeks. And we had to invite people to our house. So she and I learned how to do it, and we got to go home. And that was very, very exciting. And he felt good about it. He wanted to be home with all his toys and stuffed animals and all that. And that helped him. At the same time, we were having to prop him up and hold him down 4 or 5 times a day as he kicked and screamed and help him stay alive. Because if we didn't do it, we had to go back to the hospital. And that 6 weeks felt as long as the initial 28 days. And then finally, so he was keeping, and my point in that is he was on a roller coaster just like we were, but in his own way. So during that time, Suzanne and I would finish administering the catheter, and then we would just look at our watch and count down 4 more hours till we got to do this again. And so life was just constant. You could just hear a clock ticking in your head constantly until the next time you had to watch your son scream and cry and feel like you're hurting them, and you're putting them in pain, even though it helps them. It's not fun. And I think that 6 weeks took a toll on us mentally, as far as how we interacted as a family and how we behaved with doctors, and how it created a little anger towards God. That was a spiritual turning point for me, where I was like, there's no way this is the will of God or the universe to put a 4-year-old through this. There's no way. And so I got really angry during that time. And that was kind of, once we left that, we were able to really take about a week or so and just kind of decompress. And then we were able to give Bax a joyful treatment, as joyful as could be, with some setbacks along the way. But he kind of kept an even keel about it. As long as there were no ouchies, he was fine. Even to this day, we're going in for our yearly, our 6-month scans on Friday, and he's now 9 and doing great. And I said to him yesterday, I said, we've got to go to the hospital to get our scans on Friday. He was like, they put me to sleep. And I said, yep. And he goes, no problem. He goes, it's fine. And I'm like, I'm more worried about, I'm more triggered by it than he is, so he kind of handled it like a champ. I think as he gets older, he has started asking more questions about it, and his memory will come back from time to time. But, we were in the Ronald McDonald House in Jacksonville, Florida for 7 weeks doing radiation every day. So he got, for 7 weeks, every day, he went under anesthesia, had a laser shot into his abdomen that was so strong that it burned his back. So it was going in through the front and burning his back. Did that every day for 7 weeks on top of chemotherapy. And you ask him what he remembers about those 7 weeks, and he'll be like, was that the place with the big tricycles? And it's like, yes, it was. It definitely was. So I think that's his experience with it, is he remembers that he got a ton of gifts. He got a lot of visitors. He got to eat whatever he wanted at any time he wanted. If he woke up at midnight and said, I want ice cream, I got him ice cream. So I think that's his memory of it so far. But he is getting a little more grown, where he asks questions that are much more difficult for me to answer.
So let's kind of jump ahead in the story a little bit.
Sure.
And it's something you and I talked about in the 40 minutes we talked a month ago. And that is when Baxley kind of gets through the worst of it, at some point there's a decision that you and Suzanne make about an epic year, an epic road trip, this adventure, this let's not wait to do it adventure that you guys did. And I don't want to spoil it. I just want you to take us into that and tell us what it was, what you did, and what you learned.
Well, that started, once we were, I think after we got a positive read 3 months into treatment, we kind of felt like, okay, we can do this. The scans came back and they were like, he wasn't healed, but they were like, we're making progress. We see progress. And we were like, okay. And we looked around the hospital and we saw a lot of people that did not have the support systems that we had. So we said, okay, well, we'll do something. So we started giving kids wagons so that they could ride around the hospital in their own little beach wagon. And that became our thing. It just became, Bax had one. We loved it. If you think about it, you're taking a 4-year-old every Thursday, loading up all the stuff they're going to need for an entire day and driving it to a hospital and taking it inside and then taking everything out. It's just a lot. So the wagon helped out a lot. So we started giving those out. And then and it just became our thing, and it was amazing. And we ended up starting a nonprofit on it. And then when we finished treatment in July of 2020, my wife looked at me. We've been doing this, for a year and a half, basically. And my wife looked at me and she said, what are we supposed to do now? Like he just finished chemo. He's finished all the radiation. He just has scans. He got the all clear. There's no cancer in his body. We're not free and clear, but we're all clear for now. And she said, what are we supposed to do now? And I said, I have no idea. We're in the middle of COVID at this point, so we can't go to Disney. Disney's closed. So it was probably about 8 months later of figuring out what we're going to do. And my wife looked at me and she said, we got this nonprofit called Hug Your People where we're helping kids with these wagons. We're just giving them wagons and toys and stuff like that. And it's a load of fun. She said, what if we bought an RV and delivered the wagons? and neither one of us had ever been in an RV before. Hadn't stepped foot in one. Had seen them obviously, but never been in one. And I know my wife well enough to know that when she comes up with an idea like that is really up my alley, that I'm a absolute yes on that idea, no matter when you ask it. I said, okay, I've got a finite amount of time before she talks us out of this. So I've got to act swiftly and intelligently. So she said, let's buy an RV, sell the house, and go on this road trip to help these other kids and give our family our childhood back. And I said,
Now
well, I
you had
can't
a
think.
plan again.
Yeah, we had a plan. And I said, okay, great. So that night I grabbed my trusty phone. I turned the camera around and hit live on Facebook and said, we got a plan. Here's what we're doing as the Hoovers. So we announced it on Facebook. She got a little mad at that, but she's okay with it now. And so yeah, so we ended up in
Earlier in the story, you said I was trying really hard not to blow it here. I had a small window, and you just about blew it, but you recovered apparently.
Yeah, but I figured we'd come through this dark time. That's what could go wrong, So that was probably, we moved into the RV in June of 2021. Sold our house, put most of our things in storage that we didn't sell. So we sold most of it, but put the rest in
Oh, so
storage.
you went all in. This wasn't,
Yeah.
hey, let's just go do this a little bit. You sold your
No.
house. I mean, you were living in an RV.
Yep. The first time I stepped foot in an RV as I owned as an owner was the day I drove it off the lot as my house from the place we bought it. And I looked at the guy and I said, you know what? I cannot believe we bought a 42-foot fifth wheel. So it's a big thing. And I'd bought a big truck before. So we had a big dually truck, a 42-foot fifth wheel. And I looked at the guy, I said, I can't believe you let a guy like me just walk in here, get approved credit, and then drive off with this monster of a camper with no training. And he said, oh yeah, we do it all the time. And I was like, well, here we go. So that was our first experience. And it was, and we had kind of mapped out where we were going to go with the premise along the way that everywhere we stopped, we were going to help a child, give a child a wagon. And we were able to do that. And we had about a year and a half on the road, and we drove from South Carolina to California, spent about 3 months in California, drove back. We went to 12 national parks. We had adventures here, there, and everywhere else, met some great friends. We ended up helping over 400 families along the way. We raised over $100,000 for pediatric cancer research. It was just the most fulfilling time I have ever had in my life, and probably will ever have in my life, where I had my little coaching business and I was still making more of that than I was making in corporate hospitality. I was running that business out of the camper in every time zone in America, every new city, every week. We had a nonprofit. We were helping people. Every Friday we went on an adventure as a family. Every Monday we did an adventure as a family. Every Sunday we traveled. That was our week. And I looked at my son every day, and we had to fly him home for scans a couple times, but I looked at him and I was like, this is the thing I want you to remember about being 6. I don't want you to remember being bald in 5. Right. And that was just an amazing window of time where my wife said, what if we do this thing? And then I kind of helped push us through that window. And if you ask either one of us independently now, we'll probably tell you, I know I would tell you, I'm pretty sure she would, there'll probably never be another time in our lives where we're able to do that. Because now my son has friends, and all he cares about is gaming with his friends, playing soccer, playing football. He wants to be around his friends. He wants dad too, but leaving for 18 months in a camper with mom and dad is not something he thinks is going to be a lot of fun right now. So we had this window, and we jumped through it head first, and it was the best decision we made ever.
Can I ask you a question about faith?
Of course.
You'd mentioned a little bit ago that, very understandably, by the way,
Yep.
that when you go through and witness and parent through what you had to go, what you went through, pure and simple,
Yeah.
and at the time we're going through, it was real time, that it changes your view of faith, whatever it was before, I don't know, and whatever it is now, it's probably kind of where I'm going. But I'm wondering if you have come back in any level, or how now, fast forward, you've had some years of separation, if it has changed your faith, or how your faith has evolved from where it was 10 years ago to where it was 5 and 6 years ago, assuming that was kind of the low, to where it is now. Can you explain kind of where it is now?
Absolutely. I grew up in the church. So everything I did when I was younger was around my church friends and church family. And Patrick and I, Dr. O'Malley and I went to the same church. We were part of the same youth group. So being in faith was not something I was unfamiliar with. As you move to big cities and things like that, you come into contact with people who have different faiths and you get exposed to a lot of different things. And that was a great thing, to be educated on everything that's out in the world. And prior to my son being diagnosed, we had joined a church, and we had abruptly left the church because there was a conflict of values that we didn't see coming and we didn't find. And that departure led us, when we got into treatment, to questioning even down to the existence of God. You know, I was really angry, of saying, there's no way you're real, because I'm looking at my son going through this thing, and there's no way you would allow that to someone who didn't deserve it. And so that's kind of the bottom part of where we got. And but I started praying and meditating during that time, because there was no other way to deal with it. I just didn't know how to deal with it. We were in the hospital, and I used essential oils at that time. Hospitals give you all kinds of triggers. Mainly the smell for me is a big trigger. So I would make sure that our room smelled like lavender to calm us down. And the nurses would always comment like, it smells like a spa in here. I was like, yeah, because that's what I don't want it to smell like chlorine and medicine. Right. And so through that, I started to kind of gradually come back into my beliefs and my faith and things like that. And then as he came out of that, I said, well, hold on a minute. We're getting good signs that there's a higher power helping us through this world. I still hadn't acknowledged, what I believed at that point. And then there was a finite point on our trip where everything did a 180 for me. And we were in Yosemite Valley in California, and we were taking a family adventure, and I wanted to go see El Capitan and go see the falls. And it was this beautiful spring day in May, and there weren't a lot of people there yet because it was still a little chilly. So it was that sort of that week or two where no one has planned a vacation for that week, but the snow is mostly gone, and it's sun's out and it's bright enough, and things are green, but not the greenest they're going to be. And so we pulled into the valley that day. And I just remember I'm a big fan of rock climbing. I used to climb when I was younger, but I'm a big fan of it. And I just watched this movie called Free Solo with Alex Honnold in it, where he free climbed El Capitan in Yosemite Valley, which is a 3,000 face of granite. And he did it without any ropes. And I was like, God, that's amazing. I want to go see that thing that he climbed since we're here. So we pull into Yosemite Valley, and it is just the most awe-inspiring place I've ever been. It just speaks to me on many, many levels. I'm gonna get emotional telling this story, but I'm walking with my son and my wife, and we're having a blast. And I sit down in the valley. We brought a little picnic lunch, and I sit down in the valley, and I start hearing things, and I think, what is going on? Like, I start hearing things, and then it gets to the point where I just can't ignore this voice. It sounds like a person. I look at my wife, and there's no one around us, and I'm looking at my son, like no one's talking to me. It just sounds like a voice. And it doesn't matter what you believe. If you're listening to this, just put it through your filter. But for me, this was God. Right. And so it gets to the point I'm shoving it off. I'm like, no, I didn't sleep a lot last night, or, we're in a camper, we're in California time zones, like these things. I start hearing this voice, and then it becomes so clear that I can't ignore it. And the voice is saying, leave it here, you're free. And so I think, having the inspiration of that scenery, and there's no way, for me at least, there's no way you can sit in Yosemite Valley and question the existence of a higher power. It's just a magnificent spot for me. And now I've got this voice. And at first, when I made out what God was saying to me, I ignored it. And I said, oh, that's not for me. That's for somebody else. I don't even know what that means. And then it just kept going. And it got to be to where it felt like the rocks were talking to me, and the rocks were saying these things. And it just kept saying over and over, leave it here, you're free. And I tell that story because that was the point where my shoulders dropped. I was not stressed anymore. I looked at my son. I was like, he's alive. He's cancer free. We're on this epic vacation that he'll have for the rest of his life. And God is telling me, your work is done. You've still got to be a father, but your work as a cancer dad is done. You're no longer a cancer dad. I've got it from here. Leave it here. You're free. So I did. And I tell people all the time, but no matter what you're going through, if you pay attention and you don't, I tried to shove it off. It wasn't in my destiny to shove it off. And I started thinking about how many times I do that. I shove things off instead of listening to the rocks speak, so to speak. And so that was the point where I was able to really come to terms with my faith and really come back into the world of talking to God and believing in universal energy, believing in things that happen for a reason, believing in that I'm stronger than I think I am, believing that I have a purpose beyond wearing a suit and making money. That was the point where it all just kind of came back full circle. From Yosemite, God led us to southern Utah. He led us to New Mexico. We spent a lot of time with the Navajo Nation in there. I remember I was sitting by a campfire in Monument Valley with elders of the Navajo Nation, hearing stories about their culture when my son was in second grade. My second grade teacher had me build a hogan out of popsicle sticks, a Navajo hogan out of popsicle sticks when I was in second grade. And I'm looking at my son going, I brought you to, like, we're here. We're with them. We're with the people. We're on the land. God led us to that place so that my son could learn, so that I could relearn. And so you really think about the tipping point from Yosemite Valley for the rest of our trip was a spiritual experience. It was just the most beautiful, challenging at times, but fun, purposeful time. And the reason it was is because I was told to leave it here. I'm free. And when I did, and I followed that advice, I got to be present with my son as a little boy for the first time in 2 years, 3 years. He was no longer a bald kid fighting cancer. He's just a little boy running around playing ball. And it was beautiful. It was beautiful. And that shaped my beliefs today. So yes, my faith today is very much in goodness and people. And I do believe very much in God.
Wow. As you, I mean, this whole conversation has been incredible. And now you're years past that, several years past that. And you've got a 9-year-old now.
Yeah.
And have you figured out, that's a terrible way to phrase this question. I'm just curious to know, what do you plan to do with all of this incredible story that you didn't ask for? You didn't, it wasn't part of the plan. And if it had been a plan, it would have never been one that you drew up, but you've got this. You've got all the elements of everything you just shared with me and with everybody who's listening now. And have you given any thought to, what do you want to do with all of this? What's kind of, I hate the term "what's next" because it puts too much pressure on you. Have to do something and you don't. But I'm just curious, how's it shaping what you think you might do over the next 5 years?
That's a great question. And I intentionally leave part of that up to God to tell me. But I'm also, if you haven't put it together, like, I'm a go-getter and I kind of take action on things as soon as I think it's a good idea. I'm normally the first one jumping off the cliff. So I think, when you talk about what's next, I ended up naming my coaching company Next Crest because I found that you don't have to have a what's next, but when you have a plan for what's next, it generally leads to a more vibrant existence. We were always looking, when we were traveling, it was always like, what's our next adventure? Not what's our next struggle or the next day of work. What's our next adventure? And so I do find that you have to think what's next. And one of the things I was very careful of is not to share stories like this until I was ready to really make sense of it. Not just to say, here's what happened, but to really dive a little deeper, because I think that impacts people in a different way. And people have come up to me since 2019. And I mean, really, it's surprising how early on people said, you should write a book, you should write a book, you should write a book. And I was like, not yet. I don't know if ever, but definitely not now. I know it's not now. If it's destined to happen, it'll be there. And so for me, looking back and saying, well, what did I go through that for? And Bax and I tell each other that all the time. In fact, I looked at him this morning. He was nervous about something that was going on at school. And I said, we didn't go through that to be nervous about gym class. I said, so whatever it is, you got it. I said, you believe that? He said, yes, I believe that. So I think that's kind of where we are now. It's like I don't want that period of my life to be for nothing or to be just something I got through or to be something that happens and then you close the chapter and you just move on and carry on living and no one ever hears about it. I think there are people out there that like this. I think hopefully someone will benefit from it or recognize elements of it that associate with their life or resonate with them in some way. And so I think it's important to tell the story. However, I think it's important to tell the story when you're complete, when you feel you've transcended the pain, transcended the anger, transcended the deep emotions of it, so that you can constructively tell it and convey it. So what I'm doing now is I'm taking opportunity to reach as many people as possible, not in a way that I need recognition or I feel like I'm a savior in any way, shape, or form, but just in a way that says, I think we're all put here to help each other. And I think the best way for us to help each other is to share our stories. And the best way to share your stories is to talk about it. And especially as men, we're taught not to talk about things very much. And that was hard for me, and I went through a period of time where I didn't want to talk about it. And then I started realizing that, God gave me the strength to go through that. He gave me and my family the resilience to go through it so that one day we would talk about it and other people would hear it. And in fact, when we were in treatment, I did a podcast and it was the most unprofessional, unpolished thing. I recorded it on my phone walking from the Ronald McDonald House to the pediatric oncology ward at the hospital. And I recorded on that walk. So you hear buses, you hear planes, you hear people talking, people yelling, but I recorded that podcast and I was very upfront. I said, I'm recording this podcast so that I learn how to talk about this. And I'm going to be real. I'm not going to edit it. And it's going to be what it is. I think I did like 50 episodes of that. And then I realized I don't need it anymore. I don't need to do that anymore. But I still get messages from people who say, I listened to your podcast and it's helped me because we just got diagnosed. And so now I understand a dad's perspective or a parent perspective of what's happening and what you're going through. So I kind of take that and I say, I recently started writing a book. And it's not about being a cancer dad. It's about living your life in harmony. It's about not buying into the hustle culture. It's about not buying into the thing I think that's most important is almost always not the thing that's most important. Almost always. The thing that I'm worried about now is never going to be the thing that I'm worried about a year from now. Because it doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter. You're worried about an appointment with a client. You got a family at home. You got your health. You got, people that love you. They're going to be there 5 years from now. This appointment with this client's not going to be there. I'm not saying neglect your business or your livelihood, but I'm saying what I'm learning is like, how do I associate this experience that I had in life that was incredibly hard for me and my family? How do I associate it to something that will help people who I don't want anybody to have that experience. I don't want anybody to say, well, I have to be a cancer dad or cancer parent to associate with that guy. I want to extract the goodness out of it and say, how did my life change because of that? That's the important part. So my what's next is I'm now at a point, and this is, I think probably this year, and well, in 2024, I came to a point where I was like, I'm going to call it severe clarity. I've got severe clarity on what should be next for me. I don't know how to do it. I just know what it is. And I don't know how to do it because I've never done it. But if I start doing it, God will put people in front of me, case in point, that help me along, that help me learn how to talk about it in a different way, that help me learn how to reach people with it, and help me spread this thing of like, the best decision I ever made in my life, happened the Saturday before we were diagnosed. It was 10 in the morning. There was an ice cream truck at the soccer field at 10 in the morning. And I was like, that guy taking advantage of us people out here with our kids playing soccer brought the ice cream truck. And of course, my son said, Dad, can I get some ice cream? My knee-jerk response was no, we're going to eat lunch. But I said yes to ice cream at 10 in the morning on a Saturday. Best decision I've ever made in my life. Because it very well could have been the last time I got to make that choice. There was a week later, ice cream was the least of our concerns. Nutrition, health was the least of our concerns as far as nutrition goes. I was looking at going, I might not ever see an ice cream truck with my son ever again in my life. So what the hell? Say yes, right? So you look at what's next for me, and I really want to inspire people to live a life of harmony that anchors in the fact that the thing you're worried about is probably going to be gone in an hour, a day, a week, a month. It's probably not going to be around very long. You're worried about making money. Go find a way to make money that brings you joy and impacts other people. It's okay. If you like your job, hey, stay with it. Don't leave your job. If you love your job and your boss and the people you work with, if you love all that stuff and it provides you and your family a good living, don't listen to people who are saying you can't make money unless you are an entrepreneur. Stay with your job. Like, that's harmonious living. So I think that's when you look at what's next for me, it's going to the next level of how do I articulate through the pain, through the suffering in a way that resonates with people, that says, I can choose harmony over hustle. I can choose harmony over suffering. I can prioritize in the moment and take severe situations or intense situations and make them something that I navigate with ease and peace and grace.
We need to. I don't want to. I could keep rambling with you for another hour.
Absolutely.
But
Me too.
tell me, tell us. You've got a company called Next Crest, and you've got plans. And
Mhm.
I love how you define this, because I tell all my clients, they always, because how we're wired, how we're brought up, we're successful, we're problem solvers, we get things done. We always know what we're supposed to be doing next. We know what our 1 week, 1 month, 1 year plan is. It's the
Yeah.
plan, and we execute towards it. And so when that starts to shift and we want something else, we dip our toe into what it might be, and it's just the tip of our toe. What might it be? It might be this. It might be this. Just the tip of our
Mhm.
toe, and then immediately we jump back and say, "Yeah, but how can I do that? How could
Mhm.
I possibly launch this company? How could I possibly um, how could I possibly become a coach for real estate executives? How could I possibly leave my job as a public company executive and launch Normal 40?" And when you start with how, it prevents you from ever really exploring the what. It's the ultimate dream killer. And for you to just come out and say, I don't know how, but I know what. And I know my what with severe clarity. Two words I've never heard articulated side by side, and I effing love it. It's severe clarity, because when you have clarity on the what, the how takes care of itself.
Yeah.
Simon Sinek's made $1 billion on It Starts With Why, and I tell people, I don't agree. I don't agree. I
I
think
just,
why is super important, but your why is just going to be there. When you know what, you know why. You know why. It's obvious. You didn't start with that. It
yeah.
happened to you. But to know what you want to do with it, what you've been prepared to do, what you need to do with this education you didn't ask for, and that you'll figure out how to do it as you go, man, I think that is art. I think, and I mean that,
Thank
it's
you.
art. And I applaud you for painting it.
Thank you very much. I received that.
How do people connect with you? How do they find Next Crest? And because they're going to want to, dude.
Sure.
And just lay it out there. How do people find you?
The best way is my website, nextcrestcoaching.com. The next best way is YouTube. You can just Google Next Crest Coaching or Kevin Hoover, or YouTube it, and that's kind of where the best places to find me. Those are the places I spend most of my time. I'm on all the other places as well, as you might imagine, but those are the best. I think if you're really, I'm pretty transparent, and I think if you're really looking at more of that, those are the best places to go.
I want to issue a challenge to the two of us. One day, you and I need to meet in real life.
Yes,
Let's make that happen.
we will, and so it is.
And so
It's
it is.
already ordained.
I love it.
Yep.
Um, Kevin, thank you for a whole bunch of things. One, thanks for being you. Thanks for showing up. Thanks for learning your multiplication tables in first grade and not letting that rocket ship disappointment
Oh yeah.
stifle your growth. Um, Thanks for the days you had to show up as an actor even when you didn't want to. Thanks for your quick pivot to a plan into what you did for people who you couldn't possibly know, because I'd imagine you brighten people's day who probably don't remember your name, and you don't remember them as people who sat in your section, but I have to believe that you were the ripple that changed them. Thank you for hearing Tanya when she asked you, what are you doing here? And for
Mhm.
applying that again and again to your life. And thank you for being a great husband and a great father to Baxley. And thank you so much for sharing your story with me and with us today, man.
Thank you so much. This was, I feel confident in saying that it benefited me probably more than anybody.
All
So
right, man.
thank you for that.
Thanks for being here. Thanks for being on the Normal 40 Highway. And I'm going to see you in person on the next page. Hey everybody, that's going to do it for me, Lon Stroschein, the founder of the Normal 40, and this is another episode of Normal 40, the podcast. Look, I just want to give a heartfelt thanks to my new friend, Kevin Hoover. Thanks for your authenticity, the genuine nature in which you present yourself and your story, and for sharing your journey with us. I really appreciate it, and I learned a ton. And dude, we are going to make good on our promise to meet one another in real life, and my guess is that will be another podcast. I also want to give a quick shout out to Patrick O'Malley for connecting us. Dude, you've got a superpower, and I'm enriched by it. Thank you so much for being you. 3, I want to thank Adam Eaton for helping me put together this podcast and for being my constant co-pilot in this little journey we're on. 4, I want to thank Joan for helping me put everything together. And last but not least, I want to thank Damien Boudreau for this awesome theme music that leads us in and leads us out of every single Normal 40 podcast. Everyone, thanks for being here. Thanks for being part of this journey. Thanks for being on the Normal 40 highway. And I'm going to see all of you on the next page.